Hello and welcome, residents of Southeastern Massachusetts, to our 1-hour weekly real estate show. I'm Paul Chasse, the CEO of the Realtor Association of Southeastern Massachusetts, and we want to welcome everybody to episode 2. I'm also here with our executive producer, Josh Souza, and my social media coordinator, Trevor Chase. Also want to thank Megan Fager from RMS for sponsoring the show, and we will talk a little bit more about Megan Fager shortly. Also joining us today, and he will be in a few minutes on a couple of our segments, is Steve Medeiros. Steve is the broker at Keller Williams Realty, and he's also the immediate past president of the Realtor Association of Southeastern Massachusetts. So he will be on our show today as well. Before we begin, I'd like to remind the viewers out there that all the opinions expressed on the show are that of the guest or myself and not necessarily reflective of the association or New Bedford Guide. And also to remind you that this is an entertainment type of show. If you have a specific real estate related issue, you should always seek the advice of a professional attorney or a realtor that is familiar with your particular situation. So I just want to remind you of that as we move forward. So we're going to roll into our first segment this afternoon, and here at the Real Estate Show, we broadcast through New Bedford Guide, but there are a lot of other simulcast shows that it's simulcast to, like the Fall River Guide, the Taunton Guide, and other places. So we cover a large area, not just the South Coast area when it comes to market statistics. And what I'd like to call Region 2 today, we're going to review, and those are Region 2 market statistics. So we're going to get started with our first segment, which is market statistics. And these are for January of 2018, so these are the latest statistics that have come out, and we're going to start with the town of Westport. So Westport for January of 2018 had pending sales of 12 and closed sales of 5, and you'll notice under the pending sales, that's about 33% increase over last year. Last year there were 9 pending sales. So we can see that the trend will be for February, probably a larger amount of closing sales. Again, like I said, the closed sales for Westport in January were 5, so it was down 16.7%. And the median sales price for the town of Westport right now is $533,000, and that is a jump, a significant jump of 101%. Now, I will say with all these statistics, like I've said before, sometimes the smaller towns, the numbers can skew a little bit because there's smaller amount of sales. So if you get 1 or 2 sales, say maybe in particular in Westport on the water, that jumps up that price significantly, and that's probably what we're seeing here. The $264,950 from 2017 jump to a median of $533,820. We'll have to see if that trend continues as the months move on in 2018. Moving on to Fall River now. So Fall River is one of our larger urban areas, and pending sales for January of 2018 were 20, and that represents a 17.6% increase over last year. Closed sales, 22, and that represents almost a 5% increase over last year. So trends in Fall River in closed and pending sales are up over last year, as well as the median sales price. Last year's median sales price was right at $207, and this year in January of 2018 we're at $239.5, which represents a 15% increase over last year on the median sales price. And what I will do is I will quickly go over on Fall River the condo market, because in an urban area there are significantly more condos than there are in the outlying areas. So a real quick look at the condominium properties for Fall River pending sales in 2018. We have 4, which represents a dip of 63% over last year. Closed sales were up by 1, and the median sales price for a condo right now in Fall River is right at $100,000. Moving on to Freetown. Freetown, we have pending sales of 6 as opposed to 5 from last year, and 3 closed sales as opposed to 2, so we're right around where we were a year ago in Freetown. And the median sales price for the town of Freetown currently holds at $240,000, which represents a decrease over last year. Next is Somerset. Somerset's pending sales for 2018, January of 2018, are 12. Last year there were 13, so it's just about break even. It represents a 7.7% decrease, but it's just about break even there. Closed sales is a significant difference over last year. So last year there were 20 closed sales in 2017, and this year at this point, closed sales for January of 2018, only 8. So that represents a 60% decrease in closed sales over last year. Again, looking at the pending sales, it looks like February will probably be more in line with what it was last year, but we'll have to see. And the median sales price for the town of Somerset at this point is $247,450, and that represents a 3.1% increase over last year. Next, we have Swansea. Swansea pending sales for 2018 are 9, which represents a 40% decrease over last year. Again, Swansea last year had pending sales of 15, so there is a sharp decrease in pending sales over last year. Closed sales, however, were up over last year. So last year, closed sales represented 13. This year, there are 18. That's a 38.5% increase. So my guess is that January and February will probably even out in the end, but we'll continue to monitor those statistics. And the median sales price for Swansea for January 2018 is $292,450, which represents a 14.5% increase over last year. We now move over to Seekonk, and you'll notice as we're moving right up the coastline or the south coast area at this point. Pending sales for 2018 were 12, very similar to 2017 where there were 10. It does represent a 20% increase. Closed sales for January, 8 versus last year 7, so you're right around the same ballpark there. And the median sales price for the town of Seekonk is $246,250, which represents a small decrease over last year at 3.4%. Moving over to Rehoboth at this point, pending sales for Rehoboth in the month of January of 2018 are 11, and that represents a larger increase over last year. Last year there were 6 pending sales in the month of January, so that's an 83.3% increase. Closed sales are right about the same as last year. Last year there were 7 closed sales, and this year there are 8 closed sales, which represents a 14.3% increase. And right now, in January of 2018, the median sales price for a home in Rehoboth is at $469,500, and that represents also an increase of 12.3%. So they are on the rise in January as well. And our last town for today that we're going to talk about is Dighton. Looking at Dighton's numbers, last year there were 6 pending sales in Dighton, and this year there are 4. So that represents a small decrease of 33.3%. Again, they're small numbers, so even one pending sale off is going to make a significant difference, statistically speaking. However, it's really not that far off from 6 to 4. Closed sales for the month of January are 5, as opposed to last year there were 10, so that is down a significant number at 50%, and there's also a decline in January of 2018 on the median sales price, reflective of January 2018 of $331. Last year it was $390, so that represents in January of 2018 a decrease of 15.1%. Again, these are region market statistics, Region 2 market statistics. Next week we will be discussing Region 3 of the Southeastern Massachusetts area. But for today, that's all we have for our market review. Our next segment is going to be the seller side, but before we do that, I'd like to talk a little about our sponsor, Megan Fager. So, knowing the simple fact that purchasing or refinancing a home can be time-consuming ordeal with lenders who require several in-person meetings during work hours before a loan can be approved, it's Megan's aim to be different. Megan strives to make every step of the process, from completing the application to the closing table, seamless and efficient. Megan has joined Residential Mortgage Services in 2016 with a passion for helping people to realize their dream of home ownership, specializing in a wide variety of products that aid everyone from first-time home buyers to the more experienced investors. Megan has separated herself from the rest. So please contact Megan Kelly at RMS today for all of your mortgage needs. So thank you to Megan for sponsoring the show. We're going to move on to our next segment right now, and this is the segment we like to call the seller side. Today's topic on the seller side is sellers in the showing. It's a good time to go, and we try to put a little humor into our segment topics, and we'll discuss this in a second as to why it could be humorous at times, and it could be humorous at times, but not humorous all the time for the realtor, that's for sure. Today we're going to discuss sellers in the showing, and for this segment I'd like to bring in Steve Medeiros, who is a broker with Keller Williams Realty, and again he's the immediate past president of the Realtor Association of Southeastern Massachusetts. So welcome to the show, Steve.
Thanks. Well, glad to be here.
Great. So we know that often a homeowner will leave the property during the showing, but that's not always the case, is it?
It's not always the case. I've been representing a buyer when I've gone to a showing and the seller stays there, and I've been representing the seller when I've gone to a showing and the seller has chosen to stay there, and it actually doesn't make it as easy of a showing.
Before we get into the reason why, is there a common denominator as to why they're hesitant to leave? Is there any one or two reasons they don't want to leave, or?
I've had various reasons. I've had reasons where they just like, listen, I don't feel like going out right now, and I was like, okay. I've had people who, I had one particular person I could think of many years ago was very concerned about just anything happening in the house if somebody did something,
right.
and, which is, I mean, in all my years of doing real estate, knock on wood, I've never had an issue with anyone, stealing anything through a showing. So, I've heard of instances, but it's very rare. So,
especially in like a one-person show. I mean, open houses maybe a little bit different,
but I've never had any
one-person show. Right.
Yeah, nothing with a one-person showing.
Sure.
So yeah, that's kind of a challenge when they're there.
So, what are some of the negatives?
So the negatives, you've got the buyer's not as likely to ask as many questions. A lot of times they feel like they don't want to insult the seller or make them feel like there's any problems with their house. And a buyer may notice issues, but they still may want to buy a house. So it's just if they don't get to ask those questions and get those questions answered by the agent that's listing the property, where they can maybe address it properly, that's a concern. I've had sellers who have been there, they start answering the questions for the agent and not letting the agent do their job, and that poses a few problems. Number one, they may say something that really the agent wouldn't necessarily have to disclose, so it's not really an issue, that's a disclosure issue, and they may put themselves in a situation where they could potentially be liable for something in the future. It also makes the buyer feel more uncomfortable because now that seller's going back at them with things. Same thing on a home inspection where they hang around for the home inspection. That's also a challenge. Okay. So I really don't like the sellers to be there. I think it's much better if they can just take off, let they're hiring us to do a job, let us do our job, and make sure that we kind of again, I get a lot of the disclosure stuff from them in advance, so I make sure I kind of position it properly to the buyer.
So it's more personality. There's worry about personality conflicts. There's worry about, like you said, disclosures, and we're not talking disclosures that shouldn't be disclosed to a buyer because there's something wrong. We're talking about financial situations. We're talking about things that buyers should not know that sometimes get slipped up.
Absolutely. Okay. Or again, it's also how you phrase something. If a buyer asks a question, I can answer the question, but I'm going to be able to answer it in a way that puts the property in the best light and explains something properly. Sometimes I've had a seller just blurt out an answer and there's no explanation behind it. And a lot of times there's an explanation behind why they got water in the basement one time and this is how it happened and how often it's happened. If the seller just says, yeah, we get water in the basement, and then they don't really just explain it, that's a problem too.
Sure.
But even before the showing, they need to get the house ready to go. I've walked in and people have left underwear on the floor and laundry on the floor, or they've left just pots and pans dirty on the sink and on the stove and the counter. So things like that just getting the house ready to go is important even before that person walks in. So they can't just say, I'm going to take off and walk out the door. They should be ready to go in advance.
And that's a good point. That's probably we'll probably have a segment on that on the seller side at some point too.
Absolutely.
So if a homeowner insists on staying,
yes,
what advice do you give to them?
Just sit there, don't say anything. Just don't really talk at all. Just
maybe even a different room.
Yeah. I mean, if we're showing it downstairs, they want to hang upstairs. When we go upstairs, they can say, they can excuse themselves and come down or whatever. I did have one seller who needed to be home at one particular time for their kids. They just went outside. and they hung around outside, waited for their kids to get home from school, and then, you know, as soon as they finished the showing, then they went inside. You know, it wasn't a freezing winter day, but it was something that made it a little easier. So things like that can happen too.
So different area of the house.
Right.
Limit your conversation with the buyer.
Yeah, I would limit it completely.
And don't take anything personally.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
That I see as one of the big things. Like the realtor is a good buffer as far as showing the house and with a buyer and seller there.
Yeah, a lot of people will think, oh, if we didn't have a realtor involved, the buyer and seller could just talk directly. And I can say on most instances, we eliminate issues and we allow deals to come together because, you know, when a buyer says something really not good about the property, I don't necessarily relay that. I relay the important information that's important about it. Or if, you know, if somebody's negotiating offers and they don't actually, something they're saying how angry they are about the offer, and, you know, that doesn't matter. What matters is what are you going to counter back with, and you got to keep it business and don't let it get personal.
Right.
That's why getting them together can make it very challenging.
I agree.
Yeah.
That's why we had to. We thought that this was an important topic to talk on the seller side, and, you know, we throw a little humor in there, but again, truth be told, it's really not. You know, there's not a lot of humor to it, especially when you have buyers and sellers together. Yeah. You know, it's hard enough to get buyers and sellers together at the closing, never mind at a first showing or during negotiations.
Absolutely. And you know what, too? The other thing is, and this is something that, you know, hopefully we don't have to talk about going into the future, but right now, you know, it eliminates any questions of, you know, anyone, you know, discriminating, because they have no idea who the buyer is. They don't even know their name when there's an offer that comes in. So not seeing the person, they can't make any judgments on them, whether they're discriminating based on race or sex or you know, anything, or even just the way they look or how they're dressed, family, anything.
Right,
you know.
Right.
So it just allows it to be a transaction, which is really what it needs to stay at, so that you can get the deal done and not let other emotional stuff get in the way.
Right, and that's a good point, because it's not always a negative discriminatory action either. It could be, you know, the seller really felt good about the family that it came through versus someone that wasn't a family. But in retrospect, that's discrimination.
Right.
And those are areas that they have to be
and
very careful.
They might take an offer because of somebody that they felt, you know, about a certain way that maybe they didn't. So
it's not necessarily the best offer.
Sure.
Right.
So
okay. Yeah. Well, I appreciate the taking the time to discuss this important topic with us, and we're going to have you sit right here because you're going to be back for a few more segments on the show. And
sure.
Great. We'll be right back with our next segment in just about 30 seconds. But first, we have a brief realtor video we'd like to put on.
Thinking about selling your home can be scary. Work with a realtor member when selling your home and go from scary to sold. Go to marealtor.com/findarealtor to connect with a realtor member today.
Back. In this segment, this is our buyer's guide segment, and in this segment we are going to talk about home inspection red flags today. Oftentimes buyers go into properties not knowing what to expect. It can be a very anxious time for a buyer and a seller, not to mention the realtor involved putting the deal together. A lot of home buyers, particularly first-time home buyers, tend to overanalyze home inspections. It's not to say that home inspections aren't important, because they're absolutely important, but home inspections aren't necessarily meant to be deal breakers or are designed to renegotiate a sales price or renegotiate the deal every single time. A lot of times home inspections are really to make a buyer aware of current or potential issues with the home or the property. Some are small in nature and some are not. And so we're going to talk about the rather larger home inspection issues that really should be red flags. And that way you understand the difference between them. And basically this is an article that AOL had posted on 8 home inspection red flags. And so we're going to touch upon that a little bit today. It was written by a man called Tom Trotler, and he is the host of the Money Pit. And looking at these are definitely red flags that when we're in the business, we like to pay closer attention to. So looking at the 8 different types of home inspection red flags that are out there, starting with number 1, termites and live-in pests, live-in pests, I'm sorry. So, you know, termites or other types of live-in pests like mice or rats or things like that, that can be a source of great discomfort. The sooner, especially when you're talking about termites, the sooner termites are detected, the better, obviously, because termites can cause structural damage. So, that is something that does need to be addressed and should be a red flag to a buyer. Again, not necessarily meaning the deal's off. It just means that the termites need to be addressed one way or the other, and it's something that should be taken care of. It's something that shouldn't be overlooked within a home inspection, because like I said, getting rid of the termites is really important to the structure and integrity of the house. So there's termites and other living pests as one of the red flags. Another one is drainage issues. So we know that poor drainage can lead to wood rot, issues with the basement, could creep up into crawl spaces and attics. Things like replacing gutters could cost some money. So when it comes to a red flag, one of the red flags that we often look at are drainage issues. If there's a drainage issue that shows up within the home inspection, that's probably something you want to address with the realtor and possibly the seller. Another one, as we're talking about precipitation, I guess you could say, is mold. So mold collects basically when there is issues with water, long-standing water to be exact. And it could also be an indication of a home structure. So mold is not only an indication of standing water for a long period of time, but mold in and of itself could be a health issue. And mold can be, depending on how bad the mold situation is, mold can be, somewhat expensive to take care of. So it's an area that you want to pay particular attention to if there's an issue with mold that comes up on a home inspection. Number 4 is a faulty foundation. Now, obviously, a cracked or crumbling foundation is definitely a red flag. But even smaller issues with foundations that require repairs could range from moderate to extremely expensive. Down in this area in southeastern Massachusetts, we have, excuse me, historic properties, and historic properties are great, and they're very unique to our area, and they're wonderful, but sometimes there could be issues with foundations. And so if you find that there's a home inspection with some foundation issues, it's definitely something you want to address with the realtor and the seller. Number 6, worn-out roofing. So roofing is one of those larger expenses on a home when it comes to roofing. And roofing can range from anything from a small repair to a whole roof that needs to be replaced. We're talking more along the lines of whole roofs that need to be replaced. When you're talking about replacing a roof, you're talking about a major improvement to a property that does cost some money. That is one area that you definitely want to, if you get significant roofing problems within the home inspection, talk to your realtor and figure out, get estimates, find out what it'll cost for that particular roof, because roofs really range in cost when you're repairing them. Flat roofs are different from angled roofs. Third-story roofs are different from ranch roofs. So when it comes to worn-out roofing, definitely a red flag, something you want to pay close attention to and find out more about, explore a little bit more, and find out what the costs are for that type of thing. Number 7 in our red flag section, we have toxic materials such as asbestos. Excuse me. So asbestos can be a very dangerous type of chemical, as is lead paint. And when you get these types of toxic materials that show up within the home inspection, you're definitely going to want to address these issues. Again, these are issues that could cost some money to excuse me, that could cause some remediation expenses. So asbestos, lead paint, those types of things that come up in a home inspection, you want to pay a little bit more attention to, talk to the realtor about, and again, maybe it requires getting some different quotes to see what kind of costs are involved or what parts that need to be done, because it's not always a full house that needs to be lead removed or asbestos removed. So, but it is an area that you want to pay particular attention to in the home inspection. And number 8 is outdated wiring. So wiring in houses, wiring in old houses could be a tricky issue, especially when you have electrical panels that might be overloaded with circuits, improper grounding. In our area of the country, you know, knob and tube wiring is some of the older electrical stuff that we see within the properties, and those types of things could be fire hazards. So if the home inspection shows up with some issues with wiring, that is definitely something that you want to address with the realtor. Again, as with others, with some of these other red flags, you also want to maybe get some estimates and figure out what it is the cost really is going to be to take care of that issue. And you'll notice all of these 8 issues that we're talking about, these are major issues when it comes to home inspections in a home. In the end, it really comes down to how much you want the home and how much the homeowner is willing to accept. But we can't say this enough, that when it comes to home inspections really are for the buyer to be aware of what's going on in the house. They're not necessarily used for renegotiation. If you want the house, then you want the house. When it comes to the larger issues with home inspection, the 8 red flags that we're talking about particularly today, those are the ones that maybe you want to take a step back and say, okay, how do we mitigate this? How do we move forward and do what needs to be done? Otherwise, I would suggest, the smaller things, and we see them all the time, anything from a broken screen to, something small as far as chip paint or painting that needs to be done. Those are small issues that really are more for a buyer to be aware of. Hey, you know what? When I buy this house, maybe in a year, I'm going to take care of this, or I might need a new screen door or something like that. But that's not something that you necessarily go back and say, well, I'd like to renegotiate the price because of a screen door. It's not feasible. It's not something that you want to get yourself into, especially if you want the home, because in this market right now, there are multiple offers on many things. So when it comes to home inspections, what I say is be vigilant. Always have that conversation with your realtor and really understand the process of a home inspection and talk to the home inspector themselves. A lot of the home inspectors are very open to folks asking questions and looking for more insight. So these are the types of things that you should do when it comes to home inspections. So that's it for the buyer's guide today. We are going to take another brief break with a realtor video, and we'll be right back.
The American dream. It's more than tank tops, fireworks, and high cholesterol. It's all that stuff in a house that you own.
Because home ownership, that's as American as ditching the metric system.
You think we put men on the moon so future generations could say, buying a house seems hard? We don't think so.
So we won't rest until we fulfill your domestic destiny.
I mean, we'll sleep,
But not that soundly.
And we are back. We've got our next segment, which is called Investor Talk. Before we do that, I would just like to really quickly address a question that had come up. It wasn't within our segments at this point, but I'd certainly like to address it, and that is we had a question about mortgage interest rates and what we feel will happen with mortgage interest rates over maybe the next year or 2 years. There are indications on the mortgage interest rates that they will continue to tick up a little bit. However, we don't see them getting out of hand by any means. And I say I mean, these are some of the economic forecasts that we've been seeing over the last year. Certainly, we're in a stronger economy than we were just a couple of years ago. And because of that, we'll probably see mortgage interest rates tick up. I would say it wouldn't be surprising to see maybe 2 or 3 interest rate hikes over the next 6 to 12 months. But when we talk about interest rate hikes, you have to remember that we have to put that into we have to put that into context as it was a couple of years ago. We're not talking 1 point interest rate hikes. We're talking 1/4%, maybe 1/3%. We might go up 1% within a year, maybe a 1.5 in a year and a half or 2 years. Of course, as time goes on, we'll really be able to tell if the economy continues to gain momentum, and if it does, things could change. But when it comes to mortgage interest rates right now, they're still historically as low as they've almost ever been. And whatever they do tick up to be will be very nominal over the next year. And we'll see what happens in another 6 months to a year and see if that changes significantly. We just don't see that happening at this point. So I hope I helped to address that issue just a little bit. Moving back to what our segment is, we have Investor Talk at this point, and what we're going to talk about today is understanding the basics. We're going to talk about 1031 exchanges and the basic idea of a 1031 exchange. And again, we're going to bring in Steve Medeiros, who's the broker of Keller Williams Realty and the immediate past president of the Realtor Association of Southeastern Massachusetts. And we're going to talk about 1031 exchanges. So I guess, Steve, what we'll start with is explain a little bit about what a 1031 exchange is for people that don't know the phrase.
Okay, so a 1031 exchange is basically something in the IRS tax code that allows you to defer your capital gains on an investment property when you're selling it if you're purchasing another similar investment property. So basically, if I purchased a property for $200,000 initially several years ago, I sell it for $300,000, I have a $100,000 gain. I would normally get taxed capital gains on that because it's an investment property. If I was to not, let's say I wanted to use that tax money, whatever that tax rate would be on that, depending on what my tax rate would be, that money could be used maybe to, or could be the difference in me purchasing another property.
Okay.
So the IRS currently in the tax code now, they're trying to get away from that, the current administration is trying to look at ways to change that, but they haven't currently changed it yet. But what it allows someone to do is defer the taxes. So they're not escaping the taxes, they're just deferring the taxes into the future and allowing to use that tax money to actually purchase another property. It could be another larger property, another property of similar kind. So it has to be for investment purposes. So you could have a multifamily property, and you could convert that into a vacation home if you're renting it out. Okay, it can't be for you to use personally. There's a certain amount of time you can use it per year, but the majority of the time of the year, I think you can have up to 14 days you can use it. Again, all the stuff I'm explaining as part of this is something you definitely want to talk with a CPA about if you own investment property and you're looking to do this, because they can explain in a lot more detail.
So just for one quick second,
yes.
too. So this segment is particularly called Investor Talk. So we're talking about investments. We're talking about capital gains. We're not talking about if I sell my own personal residence or if I exchange it. This is strictly for capital gains.
Correct. So if you were going to sell your personal residence, this tax code does not apply.
Okay.
So if I bought a three-family, let's say, most situations, this is kind of most investors that I work with that do 1031 exchanges, this is kind of how it works. They bought a three-family, 10, 20 years ago. They've got a bunch of equity in the property, they maybe have paid it off by now, and they now go ahead and sell it. So now they're making a pretty good gain from when they purchased it many years ago. They now want to go into a larger property, something that's going to cash flow even more. So they go from a three-family that might have 3 rental incomes to maybe an 8-family with 8 incomes. And now they're taking that money, they're putting it down on another property, and they're eliminating the taxes that they would have had to pay on that capital gain by rolling those taxes, keeping those taxes, that tax money, and putting it into the next property. Essentially, at some point, you will have to pay those taxes, because when you finally sell that other property, if you don't do a 1031 exchange at that point, you're going to need to pay the capital gain, and your initial basis, what I've been told, is based on the original property.
Right.
Okay? So again,
So you're deferring the taxes.
correct. And every situation is completely different.
Right.
So again, like when I have a client, I'll say, hey, this might be a situation where you want to do a 1031 exchange, and I always tell them you want to talk to your CPA about how this affects you tax-wise, because everyone's tax situation is completely different. But it's something that when you're selling an investment property, if you're looking to purchase another one, it can be a really big benefit. It might give you that extra amount of money that you need to purchase a little bit larger property that maybe you weren't initially planning on if you were thinking you have to pay capital gains.
Okay.
One of the parts of that process, it's a kind of a tricky process. It's not like I could just sell it and then buy another one. You have a certain time frame you have to work within. So if I close on my property today, the property that I currently own, like I given the situation, that 3-family that I bought, if I close on it today, I have to put that money with what's called a 1031 facilitator. That money has to go into an account with them. There's a fee that's associated with that. I've seen them be around $750. I've seen some higher, but general ballpark around there.
Okay.
You put the money in their account. You have 45 days from the date of your closing to identify up to 3 properties that you may potentially purchase. So you don't have to pick one. You may have a 3 that you want to look at. You may have made an offer on one. Maybe that doesn't go anywhere. You want to jump to the next one. You can jump to that one. You can identify up to 3 properties that you would want to purchase with the funds from the first one. You have to identify them within 45 days. You have to close on them within 180 days of that initial closing date for your first property. Okay, so it allows you a lot of potential. We have some time frame to do it. I personally tried to do one with my dad on a property many years ago, and we just couldn't find the right property we wanted to buy, so we were never able to actually do the 1031 exchange because we ended up finding a property that was like about 5 months later, so we weren't able to identify anything that was good. But you're taking a chance if you're. A lot of times, what I tell people is, as soon as you get yours under contract, already start looking for what you want to find, because now you already have a bunch of properties you may have already identified. So now you're not worrying about having to do it within the 45 days. You may get yourself 60 days because you've actually started earlier than, or 90 days if you start early, depending on your closing time frame. So just getting properties identified, that's kind of the key thing. So it's not an easy process. It can be complicated. Having a good facilitator is important. It can't be anyone who's an actual agent as part of the transaction. So it can't, usually it's an attorney's firm or a CPA firm, but if they're involved in the transaction, like a closing attorney, it can't be them. So it has to be somebody else outside of that.
So when we're talking 1031 exchanges, the person that's actually moving from one property to the other is involved in 1031 exchange. But the person that's actually selling the property to them, that's to them is just a normal. Is that a typical sale for them?
It's a normal sale for them,
right?
But typically, I've seen with attorneys representing my client will put in certain terminology relating to that.
Okay.
And there's been different situations where that's come into play. One instance, this was a long time ago, the attorney specifically said, they're paying this much for the property. If we didn't close in the time frame because we were close to the end of it,
the 1031.
Then if in other words, if the seller held up our transaction and we lost that 1031 exchange, then we weren't going to have to purchase the property. So it made the seller they could have just dragged their feet on it and say, oh, we need to push it off a little bit and extend it. So
there are guidelines.
Right. So there's ways to do that. Having a good attorney that's, again, familiar with these types of things is important, so they can actually kind of have a plan going into it. And having a realtor who actually knows the process and understands it, has done it before, is really important as well. There's a lot of good realtors out there, but some of them aren't as familiar with investment properties and what goes into it. So having someone who's a little bit more familiar with it can help the process a lot more. Doesn't mean they're not going to do a good job if they haven't done it before.
Right.
But again, the more familiar you have, the better it is. So.
Okay. And we're talking capital gains, and we're talking properties that you're making money off of. But it's not always commercial buildings, like you said. It could be multifamily. If you're an investor of multifamily homes, then it could be multifamily properties. It's just not something you live in. It's investment.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be the same. So I could own a multifamily and do a 1031 exchange into a shopping mall complex, a retail complex. I could do it into a piece of land.
Right.
So it has to be the same type of. So it has to be an investment. Real estate investment property,
right?
That can be used for investment purposes for a gain of some sort. There's 1031s actually that you can do it outside of real estate. It's actually not just for real estate,
right?
But that's the most common thing that people find. But people in the construction industry do it for construction equipment all the time. So it's a part of the tax code that relates to anything you're making an investment on that you can grow some money. So
okay, yeah. And again, 1031 exchanges. Who would be a good resource to discuss 1031 exchanges? I mean, other than a realtor, you had talked about, you want
to talk to a CPA. Okay. You want to make sure the CPA is familiar with 1031 exchanges and preferably has actually done some. Okay. That's important, and ask them specifically who it was, because they may just say, oh yeah, I've done it before. You want to make sure that they have actually worked on one, they've completed one. There's a great CPA that I've worked with in the past, Doug Rodricks. He's got an office in Fairhaven and Fall River. He's actually, pretty familiar with them. He's a good guy to talk to. Having a real estate attorney who's actually worked with 1031 exchanges as well is important, because again, they just need to be familiar with that.
So the real estate attorney is to facilitate the closing. The CPA is because the taxes you're going to have to file next year and how that impacts your tax filing.
Correct, and they're gonna need to know, kind of, make sure that your situation is appropriate for that.
Okay.
Okay, like I have a client right now who wanted to do one, I said, well, you'd sit down with the CPA to do that, he just wanted to do one and didn't even know if it was gonna be worth it, you know?
Right.
I mean, it made sense, so he needs to, talk to him and find out what that would be. The attorney is important because it's not just doing the closing, but it's, in that situation, as a realtor, the purchase and sales, I'm gonna hand it over to the attorney and say, what other language, what other addendums do you wanna add on to this to protect the client? So making sure that they're a part of it. And there's plenty of times where because I'm in the middle of the transaction, a lot of times I'll converse with the attorney and say, hey, this is what's going on, this is what they're trying to accomplish, so they have a better picture of what's going on, because the client doesn't always explain the bigger picture. So I'll explain the bigger picture, what we're working on, what the different dynamics are, and then sometimes they'll write up specific clauses just that address those particular issues. And every situation is different, so I couldn't even begin to say, okay, this is one situation because it may not apply to the next person. So It depends on what's going on. So
the bottom line is, before you even think about 1031 exchanges, seek the advice of a CPA that's familiar with 1031 exchanges. Seek the advice of a realtor that has either done 1031 exchanges or has some good education 1031 exchanges, and then seek the services of a good closing attorney or a good attorney that has dealt with 1031 exchanges.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was funny because I came into the real estate industry already having tried to do one before I became a realtor. So when I came into it, then I took classes on it, got even more information on it. It was just, it's amazing what you learn as you keep doing things. So it's really important to have someone who knows a lot about it. So
okay, well, thank you for the information. Sure. Appreciate that. We're going to have Steve back for one more segment in a few minutes. Before we get on to our next segment, I believe there's another question out there, and the question was, where can I find real estate classes in the area? So what I'll say to addressing that particular question, I do know at one time, and I believe it's still relevant, BCC, Bristol Community College, does real estate classes. They're probably one of the only schools, as far as a regular school, that holds these type of classes in the area. Other than that, there are several real estate offices that offer classes, and what you can do is contact a real estate office. And a lot of times, the other question was, how much does it cost? I believe, don't quote me, this was a while ago, but I want to say BCC was somewhere in the $300 range, $300 or $400 range. If you contact a real estate office that offers a real estate class, sometimes it's a certain fee, sometimes it's in exchange for doing the class and passing the class and going through the classes, then you become an agent under that particular brokerage for a certain period of time. They waive the fee. Sometimes it's a combination of a fee or a smaller fee if you work for that particular company. There are a lot of different scenarios there, but basically, when it comes to real estate classes, a couple things that I would suggest: check with BCC first. Certainly, you can go on to if you go online and you simply Google Massachusetts real estate sales class or real estate salesperson class. I think that's better. Massachusetts real estate salesperson class. You'll probably get a whole large amount of real estate schools that actually teach. And then again, like I said, reach out to a few of the real estate offices within your area, because a lot of times they offer classes as well, either for a nominal fee or in exchange for working with them for a certain period of time. Maybe they'll waive that. So those are my suggestions when it comes to looking at real estate schools. Before we go on to our next segment, we are going to go back and again, thank our sponsor, Megan Fager from RMS Mortgage, for sponsoring today's program. Accessibility, dedication, and the use of modern technology have been the cornerstone of Megan's success. By utilizing modern technology, from the online application to uploading documents to a secure e-portal and using electronic e-disclosures, you can be in your new home and benefiting from refinancing quicker than you could ever imagine. Meeting face-to-face is always an option with Megan, but she also believes that if you're running around with your realtor or stuck at work, finding time to meet with your lender could be very, very difficult to do. So having an open door policy coupled with strong phone communications and this type of e-online transaction type of opportunity will help Megan to successfully cater to most of her clients, as well as those eager to do as much online as they'd like to. And of course, it could always make things quicker on a clear to close. So contact Megan for more information over at RMS to begin the mortgage process. And now we're going to move on to our next segment. Our next segment is the financing corner. And today we're going to talk about, this is part 2 of our 2-part series we decided last week on student loan debt and the real estate market. Last week we had some issues with the storm. If you recall, last Friday we had some issues with the storm, and some things kind of cut out. But if you didn't watch the full episode, you could go back and watch that at your earliest convenience, and you'll see we had discussed some statistics on student loan debt. I'm going to just briefly go over a couple of the key statistics, and then we're going to discuss a little bit more about what you can do with student loan debt when it comes to real estate. So a couple of the key statistics that we took away from last week among non-homeowners with student loan debt. 83% of the non-homeowners believe that their student loan debt has delayed them from buying a house. That's very typical to what we're seeing nowadays. Again, like we were discussing last week, the trend on first-time home buyers specifically are trending upwards. It used to be an age of 27, 28, and now it's up to 31, and a lot of that's got to do with student loan debt. Debt delaying potential home buyers is the highest among those with $70,000 or more in student loan debt. And the breakdown pretty much to purchase a home were 85% couldn't save for a home, 42% didn't feel financially secure about purchasing the home, and 52% simply didn't qualify for a mortgage because of their student debt ratio to income. So, we're not just talking about loan debt when it comes to student debt income ratio, but there were other areas that there were issues with, and that was when they were looking for schools. These students, before starting school in this particular study, 28% knew generally the school might be expensive, but had no idea as to how expensive it would break down to over time. A quarter of the students had an understanding of tuition, but had very little understanding of the additional costs and fees involved. And that's one thing that you really want to make sure you understand when you're investigating colleges, is it's not only about the tuition, it's about the extra fees that go into the college itself, because a lot of times the tuition in and of itself is not large. So when you win awards such as free tuition, what you really want to ask is, that's great, but what are the extra fees involved with the cost of the school? Because a lot of times they add up. The other thing that came out of the study is 1 in 5 students understood the cost of tuition, but really never factored in how much it was going to cost for housing, meal plans, and things of that nature. And those are all important issues that you have to worry about when it comes to picking a college. So what can be done about student loan debt? Well, we're first going to talk about student loan debt before you actually go into college. A couple of things that you want to think about. And again, I talk about student loan debt and I talk about students, but really it's not just the students that are involved in this decision making. It also needs to be the parents. Oftentimes, what parents aren't aware of is they are responsible for paying student loan debt as well. If your child is going to if they're going to apply for student loans, oftentimes the parents are also required to apply for student loans as well, because it's a shared process between the student and the parents, which also means parents will be taking on income debt ratio issues once the student graduates college as well. So it really should be a communication between the student and the parent when it comes to looking at colleges. A couple of things you want to kind of keep in mind before getting into college and when you're thinking about college. Again, obviously, in addition to what it is you want to do, where you want to go, you want to ask yourself, is it private versus public college? What is more important to you? Obviously, private college, in many cases, is going to be more expensive than a public college. And on public colleges, in-state versus out-of-state tuition makes a huge difference too. There are many times students don't understand that. They think they're going to a state college, say in Maryland or Virginia or something like that, and they think, well, it's a state college, it's cheaper. A lot of times, out-of-state colleges are far more expensive than in-state colleges. So you want to debate whether, if you're going to go to a state college, if it's an in-state college versus out-of-state college. And number two, if it's an out-of-state college, find out if they have in-state tuition for the state that you're living in. For instance, in Rhode Island, there are some state colleges in Rhode Island that do offer in-state tuition for Massachusetts residents. So that's something that you could also look at. Number 3 is dorming versus not dorming. Obviously, there is a significant difference in cost when it comes to dorming versus not dorming. Options are limited around here in the southeastern Massachusetts area, but there are still many options. UMass Dartmouth is not the only option. You have Bridgewater State. You have a lot of the smaller private colleges, which might cost more money, but you might be able to commute to and save money on the dorming. So those are the issues that you want to talk about as well. There are a lot of kids nowadays that are beginning at a community college and transferring to a 4-year college. And these aren't just kids that may not necessarily be able to get into a 4-year college. These are kids that want to start off in a community college, to start with a lower student loan rate, and then transition into a 4-year college. Something you could check out, and especially in Massachusetts, is I believe they still have I believe the program is still going on where if you start community college and you transfer it to a state college in Massachusetts, that community college tuition moves with you to the 4-year college. Something you definitely want to investigate, not only right now if you choose a community college, but if you plan on going to an in-state college, finding out from that in-state college if that is the case, that the community college fees or the tuition move with you into the 4-year college, because that could be a significant savings over 4 years. Finally, again, like I had said, you really want to understand the differences between tuitions, fees, costs for books, meal plans, and other high-priced items. Sometimes you can opt out of health insurance when it comes to colleges. A lot of times colleges will add this into your fee structure, but if you already have health insurance under your parents or you're already paying for health insurance, you can opt out of health insurance, and that could be a significant savings on your cost for college. So that's something you want to keep in mind as well. Now, if you've completed college and you've already amassed a significant amount of debt for college, obviously that is something that happens a lot nowadays. Not all is lost on that. But there are a few things that you may want to think about when it comes to student loan debt after you're out of college. So if you've graduated college and the student loan debts have started to kick in and you're worried about, hey, am I going to be able to buy a car? Am I going to be able to buy a house? And you're really worried about it. We do have a few tips that you could take away when it comes to student loan debt. And the first one is consolidating all your student loan debts, if possible. It is a good idea to find a lending institution that is willing to consolidate all of your student loan debts into one payment, and what the best rate with that lender is. Shop around a little bit, because 1/4%, 0.5% could make all the difference when you're talking about $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in student loan debt. So that is one area that you want to look at. Another thing that you may want to do is pushing yourself to make 1 or 2 extra payments a year. Obviously, we talk about that with mortgages and how that brings down the total amount of time it'll take you to pay off your mortgage. The same works with student loan debt. If you make 1 or 2 extra payments a year, that will significantly make a difference on the amount of time you're going to have to pay, how much an interest rate you're going to have to pay for your student loan debt. So consider making a couple of extra payments a year. I do know some students, or post-students, I should say, that have their careers now, but pick up a second job just to pay that student loan debt back. They dedicate their paycheck to making extra payments, because that can make a significant difference as well. Remember, you don't always have to pay off the whole debt in order to make your financial status better. It's just bringing down that balance to make your income debt ratio better is what you're looking to do. So anything you can do to drive down that income debt ratio as you move forward is going to help you in the end, especially when you're purchasing a house. A couple other things you can do to minimize your issues with student loan debt while you have student loan debt is to open as little additional credit as possible. So, the knee-jerk reaction is you get out of college, you find your dream job, and you're working in your career, and you find you're making a lot more than minimum wage now, and you start opening up a couple of credit cards. Well, just remember that your student loan debts are now kicking in. And again, your credit report is reflecting the student loan debt. So if you add credit cards to that, you're adding more credit to your credit balance already, and your income debt ratio is going to be that much greater, and thus it's going to be that much harder to purchase a home. Other ideas: travel closer to home while you have your student loan debt. Maybe spend a little less on your travels and wait until after your debt is gone before you go off and explore the earth. because that can help put some of that money that you were going to put towards a larger vacation towards your student loan debt. Another thing you can do is opt for, when you're purchasing a car, ultimately everybody has to have a reliable car, especially if you're gonna be out there in the workforce. Opt for an off-lease, opt for a lease itself. Anything you can do to bring down that loan income debt ratio again. So if you purchase a car that's $24,000, you have $24,000 more debt on your credit report, in addition to the $30,000 or $40,000 you have in student loans. If you buy a car that's only $15,000, that's off lease, or you lease a car and you don't necessarily purchase a car that you get a 6-year loan on, that will also help with your income debt ratio. And you notice the word here is also always income debt ratio, because your income debt ratio is really going to help you when it comes to purchasing a home for two reasons. Number one, it's going to allow you to optimize the amount of money you can afford for a mortgage, but number two, the mortgage payment that you can afford to make every month. So you always want to keep in mind when it comes to your student loan debt, what can I do to position myself on the income debt ratio to keep it down as low as possible. And then finally, what I would say is to talk to a lender, talk to people about the monthly programs that there are available. If you're struggling with your monthly student loan debt payment, there are options on that as well. You can do ratios where if you're coming out of school and you're making X amount of money, but your payment is far more than what you may be able to afford. There are programs where you can adjust your loan to be a ratio of what it is that you're making. And just remember, if you do things like that, the interest doesn't go away. It continues to build if you're making smaller payments. But certainly working that out with your lender is a lot better than not making your payments at all. So those are the types of conversations you definitely want to have with a lender. And then when it comes to a mortgage itself, if you still have student loan debt, I would talk to a mortgage lender to be sure that you are in a position to be pre-approved for a mortgage and what you can basically afford, because what you can afford may not necessarily be what's affordable within your market. So it may be something that you want to have a conversation about with a mortgage lender before you even begin to look. So you have a better idea based on how much loan you still have left as to what you can do. And a lot of times the lender can also set you up for success, as we say, over the next couple of years in what to do to drive that credit and really optimize your credit for purchasing a home over the next couple of years. So basically, those are some of the tips that we have for student loan debt. It has become, like we said, a huge problem in this country with the rising prices of colleges and college tuition and more people going to college. And that's great that more people are going to college, but now you have to shift your mindset and to be a little more savvy, because when you get out of college, having a $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 loan can be challenging, especially in this marketplace. So things that you want to consider as you're going through college, before you start college, and after college. So we hope that we help to address some of those issues. And again, don't be afraid to call and talk to a mortgage expert when it comes to student loan debt, because it is something that is definitely going to play a huge factor when you're looking to purchase a house. Finally, what I'll say is, if you have any questions on student loan debt or you want more information, the website to go to is www.studentloans.gov. Again, that's www.studentloans.gov. That is the government website, which has a lot of information, FAQs on student loan debt, and a lot of these tips come from there, and there's a lot more information there. So definitely check that out, and that should help you as well. So we're going to head into our next segment in just a minute. We'll be right back after this brief realtor video.
Your huddled masses yearning for a playroom. Maybe in the basement? Or a sink that's his and hers. And hers. And his. Then hold on tight, because this rocket's headed straight to the top of the cul-de-sac. It's not a real rocket. And we're not stopping until you've got your own little slice of the American dream. Because you can have your cake and live in it too.
Okay, so we're back right now. Before we start with the Friday flash round, we did have another question that we'd like to address, and actually, we're going to bring Steve Medeiros back in, broker of Keller Williams Realty, to go through our Friday flash round. But before we do that, we'll give Steve the opportunity to answer this next question, which is, do you have the question there, Steve?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's the question?
So this gentleman asked if the property is over, he's over 65, he has a 2-family home, does he still have to pay capital gains after he sells it? So it really depends on the situation. So it's not like a straight yes, no, maybe. If he lives in the property, okay, he could potentially do a 1031 exchange. It depends on his tax situation. If he doesn't live in the property, so if it's not his primary residence, then your capital gains exemption typically doesn't apply because you have to have lived there 2 out of the last 5 years.
Right.
So if you have, you could maybe get it on your portion that you lived in. So typically it's like if you have a 2-family, like 50% of the property, you wouldn't have to pay that on. The other 50% you would. So again, talk to your CPA, have a conversation with them. They'll guide you to the proper way to handle that.
So it depends, owner occupied, it depends how many years. It also depends on what they're looking to do in the future.
It depends what they're looking to do in the future. Yeah, if someone just owns a 2-family, okay, and they don't live in it, they've never lived in it, then there is no capital gains exemption on that.
Right.
So doing a 1031 exchange would be appropriate if you're looking to purchase another property. If you're not looking to purchase another investment property and maybe like go up to something larger, a different type of investment property, there's no point in doing 1031 exchange because you're not exchanging into anything else.
Right.
So,
And if he's 65 and he's just simply looking to sell his property because it's a 2-family and he's got an income out of it and he's concerned about paying capital gains because it's an income property, where it's if it's owner occupied. If it's owner occupied, there really isn't as much concern as far as capital gains necessarily.
Again, like I tell everybody, when it comes to everyone's tax situation is different. I mean, I've had people who have some really complex situations that, at first glance, they ask a question and the answer is very, oh yeah, just do this. But when you start getting into some of the minutia, you're like, oh, whoa, that's not what you can do.
Right.
So what I would say is in those types of situations, I think the point of a lot of these questions is to kind of get people thinking and realizing there's other potential opportunities out there to do certain things.
Right.
And then go and see the appropriate professionals who are experts on that particular area to actually give you the actual answers specific to your situation. Because if you just go by what you're hearing on a show like this, you may have certain things that maybe give a different answer.
Sure. Okay, so seek the CPA, right?
CPA for the tax stuff, yeah.
Sure, okay. All right, so we're going to get into the Friday flash round at this point. We do this every Friday. This is where we have just the topic of the week that we talk about. And this week we're going to talk about the legislative impact of energy scoring on the real estate market. And I've got Steve here today because Steve, like I am, we're both involved with the Mass Association of Realtors Government Affairs Committee. And this is something that realtors around the state have really been kind of paying attention to, because in our part of the country, in the Northeast, we have a lot of older home stock. So it's something that we have to be careful of. It's actually this is not a new topic, but a lot of people don't realize what is going on behind the scenes up at the State House when it comes to these types of bills. So we're going to bring Steve back in, like I said, and we're going to talk about this particular bill. And actually, there have been a few different bills like this discussed over the last couple of years. So let's start off with, what is this all about, the energy scoring?
Okay. So I was actually the chair of government affairs for the State Realtor Association last year, so I had a lot of conversations about this with subcommittees, and we were just talking about kind of what was going on. Essentially, Massachusetts is the most energy efficient state in the country, so they want us to stay at the top. So what they proposed previously, and they're still trying to propose, is trying to make it mandatory that when you sell your house, before you put your house on the market, you're going to have to get a mandatory energy audit prior to listing your home for sale and get a score on your property. The challenge with that, which, it sounds good at face value, everyone's like, oh great, it makes people more efficient, which is awesome, we all want that. But when you delve deeper into it, there's a lot of challenges with that. The biggest challenge for me is if I am just a regular seller, okay, and I want to contact a realtor tomorrow to put my house on the market, I can't do that.
Right.
And that to me is the biggest challenge, because that I'm required by law to go and get an energy audit. The challenge with that, again, if you delve deeper into it, if you call for an energy audit today, right now, just scheduling, they're about 3 to 4 weeks behind before you can actually get an appointment. So then you have to wait for that to happen. So you can't even put your house on the market. You got to wait a month potentially. And if every home seller that wants to do that has to make that happen, that could push us off. Now you're going to flood that market, which means you're going to have even more time, so it could push it off to probably 3 or 4 more weeks beyond that. That just makes the challenging process even more challenging, delays the process. And there's a lack of inventory right now. People need, we don't have a lot of houses. We need more people to sell their homes because there's a lot of buyers out there that can't find something. It's just going to delay the amount of inventory that goes onto the market.
So it definitely bogs down the transaction process.
Oh, tremendously.
Right.
And then stigmatizing the property.
Well, that was the other area I was going to get into. So energy scoring, actual energy scores.
Right.
And what that could do. And
right.
how scary that really is for homeowners.
Oh, it's really scary. So imagine if you have a house that was built in, the early 1900s, let's say it was 1920, and you go to sell your house, and now you've got a score attached to it because your house isn't efficient. Because you can only be able to get your house so efficient. It's an older home. It wasn't built with newer, building materials and newer building standards. So it's going to only get so efficient. So now people already know you have an older home. They can see that when they look at the listing sheet. But now to say there's a score saying you're not efficient, it can make it even more of a challenge. The other thing that's also an issue is, my particular home that I bought, was built in like 1930 something. Since I bought my home, the previous owner gutted the entire house to the studs, insulated the whole house, brand new electrical wiring, and plumbing, and all that. Since then, I've had an energy audit done, and I've done extra insulation, air sealing. I have a brand new high efficient boiler. I have solar on my roof. I mean, I've got a very efficient home. Yet, through certain systems that use these algorithms to come up with that, they equate to my house not being very inefficient. But it actually is very efficient. I have very low energy bills.
Right.
So it's just the concern of that whole scoring thing is it even accurate? And if I could have the most efficient house in the world, but if I'm leaving my windows open all day long,
well, that's the other thing, right? So we could have two houses side by side that are basically built around the same time with the same type of with insulation and everything else. And my wife likes 75 degrees, but your wife says 65 degrees is fine all day long.
Right.
That makes a difference in and of itself.
Huge difference. And I tell clients, they'll say, well, I just want to see what their current heating bills are. And I said, well, it all depends on how they keep the house. So you could go and you could look at someone's energy bills, and they could be keeping the house at 60 all the time. You're like, wow, they don't pay a lot for heating. But then you go into the house, you're running it at 70 all the time, and you're like, wow, these energy bills are crazy. What they showed me wasn't correct. Well, it was correct for their living situation. Right. So everyone's different. When I bought my house, I lived in it for a couple of years, and I realized that I needed to make it more efficient because it had an older boiler. It wasn't insulated very well. So I did all that. And I saw a huge difference. My energy, costs went way down. And then I put, solar on the roof to heat my hot water, which brought my gas bill in the summer when you don't have heat just for the hot water went from like, $75 down to like $30 just because I put solar thermal on to heat my hot water. So there's things you can do. And I got some rebates from the government for that. So there's a lot of opportunities. I think what the problem with the energy bill that they're trying to do is that they're trying to make people do something, but it doesn't solve the problem ultimately. Because if I make you do an energy audit and I give you a score, it only hurts the person selling the property.
Right.
It doesn't make them make it more efficient.
And I think that's a good point. So I think the realtors, all in all, support energy efficiency, right?
Right, absolutely.
And I think maybe the way to do that, we've discussed this in the past, that the way to do that is through tax incentives,
right.
Through homeowners that want to invest in their properties and to make them more energy efficient, to utilize those tax incentives on the time frame that they can afford to do versus being at the time of a transaction when they have to do it.
Right. And so, I went into it, knowing that the house was older and it needed some updates, and I just budgeted for that. And then, they have if you're part of most utilities, so if you're part of, if you have a municipal utility, it may not be part of it, but if you have like Eversource and National Grid, you pay part of your energy bill goes into this fund. Right. That there's money there. So I use that to get a rebate towards my heating system, towards my hot water tank, towards my insulation. At the time, that incentive was they were paying 75% of the insulation costs. They air sealed it for free. I got a bunch of money towards my boiler, my hot water tank. And then whatever I didn't have to, that I wasn't part of the rebates, I was able to put into a loan. It's a 0% loan for 7 years called a heat loan. So I paid that off instead of paying, dropping $10,000 on all those things. I was able to pay that off over 7 years.
Right.
And I'm just coming up, actually this summer is when it's going to be paying off. And, I was paying $100 a month versus dropping a lot of money up front, but that I didn't have. And so, yet my house has been efficient over those 7 years. And I didn't pay any interest. And it was just money I was going to spend anyway. I just was able to keep some of the money in the bank that, so I could take care of stuff. So it's just I think those are better ways to do it. And if they offer more incentives, people will use that money to actually improve the homes. Making it be a score is just going to penalize people that really don't need it. It shouldn't be tied to the transaction at all.
Right.
Because it's already complex and it's already something that has a lot of things going on in it. Why add something else to it? They already currently have it available. They just need to offer more incentives to people to do it. I've had tons of clients who've actually done energy audits. They've done it and they say, well, okay, I know all these things I have to fix, but I don't have the money to fix it.
Right. So
knowing that there's money available to do that makes it a lot easier. So I think that's really kind of the key thing. MassSave.com is the website to go to see a lot of the incentives they already have available as it is. So
I think the summary to this is that the Realtor Association, which a lot of people don't realize how much we do in the legislative arena to protect homeowners and protect private property rights. But in this particular case, this is something we'll continue to monitor.
Yep.
We'll continue to fight when it needs to be fought, and if we need to bring it up again in the future to let people know, and maybe if it gets to the point where we need some kind of call for action, and we'll talk to residents and some of our viewers out there maybe to write letters or call their state reps or senators as well, as need be. Right now it's not needed. We're keeping a close eye on it. It does keep rearing its ugly head, seems like every single year, but we've been able to kind of keep it at bay at this point.
Yeah, and I would say, if you happen to be friendly with a state senator representative, and I wouldn't make a special trip to see them about this. This is not to that level yet, like you're saying. But if you do run into them at a social setting or at the grocery store, just mention it to them. Because when I mentioned it to my representative, he had no idea, because he had gotten the kind of the whole shtick from the other side and what they were presenting. He didn't realize how it affected the transaction. So at face value, it sounded great. When he realized what it actually did, he said, "Oh, I would never vote for that." So if you just let him know when you see him, it's a great way to kind of get things going. And then if we need to turn the heat up at some point, we can. So
right.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your insight on this, and I appreciate you coming on the show today, Steve.
Yep.
So Steve Medeiros, broker of Keller Williams Realty, and thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
All right. So we're going to wrap up today. Join us next week. Next week we're going to review Region 3 area of our market statistics. We're going to have more information for buyers, sellers, and investors. And next week are going to talk about the impact of South Coast Rail and its impact on the real estate housing market. So hope you can join us next Friday. And remember to always use a realtor in the transaction, whether you're buying or selling. Have a great night, everybody.